We've told the story of Champ Ferguson, one of the most well-known Confederate guerrillas operating in Appalachia during the Civil War. Today we tell the story of another guerrilla leader on the side of the Union who was also Champ's bitter enemy. Hello folks, I'm Steve Gilly along with Rod Mullins, and this is another one of the Stories of Appalachia.
You know, Steve, we had, I wouldn't say a lot of fun, but we had at least a very interesting time putting together the podcast about Champ Ferguson and learning a lot of stuff about Champ Ferguson. Now we get to find out about a man who was his rival and the way that they kind of fought back and forth, one for the Union, one for the Confederates, but that there was a mutual respect kind of almost for each other, as opposed to maybe some other feuds that we'll talk about a little bit later.
Well, I mean, these two men were different sides of the same coin, I guess you could say. They're both guerrilla fighters. They're both into it in whatever vicious way they need to prevail in their actions. And they just sort of, I guess, adopted each other as public enemy number one in these particular situations. And this stuff really, between these two, it's sort of like a proto feud, one of the very early versions of the feuds that would happen throughout Appalachia after the Civil War was over with.
I kind of look at it as a yin and yang sort of thing. You know, for one being yin, the other answers back with yang. So it's, I understand perfectly where you're coming from, but I also associate it with that.
And folks, the fellow we're talking about is a man named David Crockett Beaty, who was born on February 19th, 1817 in the Obed River Valley in Fentress County, Tennessee. And Dave Beaty, also known as Tinker Dave, lived his entire life there, known as a peaceful and industrious member of the community. But when the specter of the Civil War loomed over the nation, Beaty, like many others, found himself at a crossroads. Initially indifferent to the brewing conflict, he stood neutral, unswayed by the debates on slavery and secession.
Well, Steve, it wasn't until Confederate General Willis Scott Bledsoe, who made a visit to his farm, and we're talking about Beaty's farm, that he was compelled to choose sides. Reluctant at first, the tides turned after the Battle of Mill Springs in nearby Kentucky early in 1862. Beaty declared himself then a Unionist, an act that would forever change the course of his life. Together with his sons Claiborne and also Dallas, Beaty formed Dave Beaty's Independent Scouts, a company of about 60 men drawn from around the area of Fentress County, along with a few men, including the Treat brothers, who were former Confederate soldiers. Beaty's Union guerrilla band, that's right, became a force to be reckoned with in East Tennessee. And I have to say this, Steve, the name of David Beaty's Independent Scouts. I know one thing, they're not selling popcorn and they're not selling cookies.
Sounds almost like an old-time rock band, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah.
Well, this was no rock band, though, folks. The Union military frowned upon such independent units as Dave Beaty's Independent Scouts, wanting the men of Fentress County to join regular units and deploy as the U.S. Army saw fit. But Beaty and his men were undeterred. They operated fiercely, guarding their homes against the chaos of war, even if it meant defying Union directives. It was the tragic loss of Elam Huddleston of Adair County, Kentucky, Beaty's most trusted confidant, to Champ Ferguson, that ignited a fierce vendetta. Ferguson's killing of Huddleston fueled the flames of revenge, escalating tensions between the two guerrilla leaders. Tinker Dave led his men in a raid on the Cherry Creek community in Sparta, Tennessee. There, the men took food, horses, ammunition, and other supplies from Confederate sympathizers in Cherry Creek, as recorded by a young lady named Amanda McDowell in her diary. They later sold those horses and cattle that they also took to Unionists in Kentucky. And this Beaty did for two reasons. One, to cause as much trouble for the rebels as he could, and two, to get the attention of Champ Ferguson, hoping to lure the man out so he could kill him. That's brutal.
You're right, Steve. That is brutal. But amidst all of this chaos, the origin of Beaty's moniker, Tinker, remains a little bit of a mystery. Some say it stemmed from his habit of tinkering with things. Boy, I know I've been accused of tinkering with things at times. But others suggest that it was to distinguish him from another Dave Beaty known as Coolie Dave Beaty, who lived in Jamestown. Beaty and Ferguson, though, were alike in many ways. They both lived in the woods, raided farms for food and ammunition, and both were quick to kill anybody who tried to stop them. Being from the area, both men knew the lay of the land as well as anybody could, making them both nearly impossible to track in the remote parts of the Upper Cumberland. Ferguson, it's said, although there's no hard evidence to support it, was upset that Tinker Dave and his men had gone to the Ferguson farm in White County and forced Mrs. Ferguson and her daughter to strip naked and then cook for the Beaty men.
Yeah, talk about brutal. That right there would be brutal indeed if that had happened. Well, in return for all that, Ferguson and his men, disguised as Union soldiers, came to the Beaty farm where they asked Mrs. Beaty if they could see her husband. She told them she didn't know where he was, and they then turned around and rode off. However, Tinker Dave had been in his fields and had seen Champ Ferguson, recognizing him even in the Union uniform. Now, the actual encounters between Beaty and Ferguson were brutal. Their skirmish at Dug Hill, between Monterey and Sparta, resulted in the two men coming face to face and wounding each other badly enough to put them out of commission for a few days. Beyond the battles, though, Beaty's character shone through. He didn't coerce his men into supporting the Union, but educated them, leading a home guard that defended Fentress County with fervor.
And the impact of their rivalry reverberated through East Tennessee and Eastern Kentucky, transforming this part of Appalachia into, quote, no man's land, end quote. Their guerrilla tactics disrupted the lives of those in the area, leaving a lasting imprint on the region's history in the form of many post-Civil War feuds, from the Howards and the Turners in Harlan County to, you guessed it, the Hatfields and the McCoys in Pike County, Kentucky, and Logan County, West Virginia. In 1862, though, an unusual period of temporary peace arose as it was declared that no raids be made into Albany, Kentucky, or Livingston, Tennessee. This unexpected truce led Beaty to lay down his arms briefly in an attempt at reconciliation between Union and Confederate guerrillas. Peace, however, though, was short-lived. Soon Beaty and his men were back in action, intercepting a wagon loaded with medical supplies and cattle bound for the South. They seized the rebels, and they sent them packing.
Well, Rod, by 1863, Beaty's guerrillas began attracting the attention of high-ranking Confederates. None other than General Braxton Bragg dispatched Colonel John M. Hughes on a mission that morphed into an 8-month campaign targeting guerrillas, with Beaty at the top of Hughes' list. September 8, 1863 marked a significant turn as Beaty finally engaged in a skirmish with Colonel Hughes' forces, which included several Confederate guerrilla groups, including that of, Champ Ferguson. Details remain obscured about the location, but the rebels claimed the lives of 8 of Beaty's men. Interestingly enough, though, the official report of this skirmish wasn't filed till April 1864, leading to much speculation. Was Hughes too occupied looting with Champ Ferguson and his men? Or did he deliberately delay the report to spite General Bragg, who he was none too fond of?
Interesting. Inquiring minds want to know, but we probably won't know ever unless something gets dug up through a time machine or whatever. But as the tensions did escalate, Ferguson, Hughes, and General Willis Scott Bledsoe clashed with Union home guards in Fentress County in February. Amid the chaos, a few of Tinker Dave's scouts, along with Rufus Doughty and his men, were overwhelmed. After 4 or 5 casualties, Doughty and his remaining forces retreated with Champ Ferguson in hot pursuit. Ferguson found one of Beaty's men near a woodpile and shot him in cold blood on the spot. Now, throughout the Civil War, Beaty and his men operated nomadically, but they also had a fortified hideout known as Beaty's Cave in the mountains of Morgan County, Tennessee. Referred by Tinker Dave as Morgan's Courthouse, the cave became a sanctuary for Union sympathizers and members of the Union League.
Now, speaking of that cave, Rod, there's a legendary account of a skirmish that happened near there, claiming that a massive rebel cavalry force of 1,500 men attacked, but Beaty's men, now mind you, we're talking 60 or 70 men, repelled them with fierce resistance and a massive slaughter of rebel attackers. This tale remains more folklore than fact, as you could probably imagine. Anyway, Beaty's enemies weren't confined to the battlefield. In Overton County, a Confederate sympathizer named William Wendell harbored a deep vendetta against Beaty, aiming to bring him down for reasons shrouded in mystery. His stated goal was, quote, to kill Tinker Beaty and take all he has, end quote. He, like Champ Ferguson, was unsuccessful in eliminating the Union guerrilla fighter.
Well, Beaty spent the remainder of the Civil War safely hidden in Morgan's Courthouse, determined to protect the citizens of Fentress County, attacking any Confederate force that came through the area. Beaty also showed no mercy to Confederate sympathizers. Reports speak of him of confronting a group of rebels who had taken over a church building, using it to gamble, drink, and devise plans to raid and terrorize Union sympathizers in Fentress County. Tinker Dave and his men, finding the church empty, waited on them to return. When the rebels came back, they spotted Beaty and fled, suffering 2 dead and 2 wounded by Beaty's men in a skirmish. Amidst all the chaos, Tinker Dave Beaty shared a trait with Champ Ferguson. He showed no mercy for any Confederate. There's a chilling tale of him ordering a man's horse to trample on the face of a rebel sympathizer he had shot, showing the veracity of his resolve.
Well, Rod, the war officially ended with Lee's surrender in April 1865, but Ferguson remained a relentless threat. 3 weeks after the surrender at Appomattox, Ferguson attempted to abduct Beaty while he was having supper at a friend's house near Jamestown. Ferguson and his men rode up and ordered Tinker Dave to surrender his weapons and get on his horse. Beaty, rightfully fearing that he was going to be executed by Ferguson, spurred his horse and managed to escape, albeit with 3 bullets out of 20 fired by Ferguson's men left in his body. And Rod, this act sealed Ferguson's fate. Ferguson's reign of terror finally came to an end when he was arrested, tried, and hanged in the fall of 1865 for his crimes. And Beaty's testimony proved crucial in condemning Ferguson to death.
After Ferguson's execution, Beaty's life finally took a turn towards the peace he had fought for, but his legacy continued well beyond the battlefield. Beaty's post-war life in Jamestown remains a bit of a mystery, but the glimpses we have shed light on his character as a common family man and respected citizen. Serving as a Jamestown alderman, Beaty played an essential role in the town's reconstruction, leaving his mark on the community.
And his family's commitment to justice didn't wane after the war. His son Claiborne, following in his father's footsteps, became the captain of the Tennessee State Guard stationed on the Cumberland Plateau, a group aimed at protecting freed slaves from Ku Klux Klan violence. Tinker Dave finally passed away on August 22nd, 1876, at the age of 69.
Wow. Just a total, difference between the men, yin and yang, kind of like what I was saying there at the beginning of it. One side of the coin, you've got Champ Ferguson, brutal, nonstop, doesn't let up. But then on the other side of the coin, you've got Dave Beaty, who was, well, I think he best described it back here. He was a common family man, respected citizen in his later years, but he did some things also that was out to prove a point.
Yeah, when you have somebody's horse trample him in the face because he's on the wrong side, yeah, that's pretty brutal right there.
Right.
But I'm looking at this script, Rod, and doing a little math, I'm sitting here looking at, he's 69 when he dies in 1876. This guy was in his mid 50s during the Civil War.
Wow.
He was not some young fella doing this. He was quite past middle age, to be honest with you. So, that just shows the brutality of this thing and how the war forced people to do things that more than likely they would have never done had the war not come along. But the biggest thing that I want to point out is that this whole war was sort of the genesis for the feuds that happened throughout Appalachia. This stuff between Tinker Dave and Champ Ferguson was very much reminiscent of the feuds, don't you think, Rod?
Yeah, I think so too. And, I kind of think about it this way. Champ Ferguson, kind of like your equivalent to Devil Anse Hatfield. He's almost unrelenting in some ways. And then you've got Dave Beaty over on the other side, which is Randall McCoy in one way, but Randall McCoy doesn't like everything that Devil Anse is doing because he feels like everything is aimed at him. Everything's being taken out on him and so forth. And he has no other choice but to fight back, or he's going to run all over him. The Hatfields are going to run all over the McCoys with it. And so you kind of see that. It's that dichotomy, so to speak, of, that one side, one to the other, and especially this thing with the feuds. Yeah, it definitely stands out.
One thing that I read in doing research for this, at the end of his life, Champ Ferguson was interviewed by a reporter. And this reporter asked him if he had, any hard feelings or anger or bitterness toward Tinker Dave Beaty. And his reply was surprising. It's kind of like, no. I mean, he would have done the same thing had the tables been turned, and he only wished Dave Beaty the best when all was said and done. And that, folks, is the story of Union guerrilla Tinker Dave Beaty, another one of the stories of Appalachia. Thanks for listening. Now, be sure to subscribe to the Stories Podcast on your favorite podcast app. And if you're watching us on our YouTube channel, please go down below, click that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and leave a comment. That helps us out with that pesky little YouTube algorithm, if you know what I mean. Well, till next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everybody.